guys, my name is Jay Wilson. I'm a freelance consultant through my company Onyx Reporting. Today I'm coming at you with a new tutorial or content that I haven't done before. Specifically, I'm building something or going to go over something that targets the major domos of the organization, the people who are in charge of adoption and maintenance of your Domo instance. Now we're going to look at using Domo Governance and Domo Stats datasets to help you keep track of all of these data sets and cards that are being produced in your instance. Let me show you what we're actually going to build. I know, or I hope you have a strong enough relationship with your CSM where they've told you about the free activity log quick start. And if you don't know what that is, talk to your CSM, tell them that Jay Wilson from Onyx Reporting sent you, and find out about that. But this is something that I haven't seen any other customers do. What I have here is a card that lists out every data set in my instance. And then I've got some metrics about what that data set is being used for. So how many output data sets? How many ETLs is it part of? How many cards does it feed? And then more importantly, who's viewing the cards? Sorry, who's viewing the cards on that data set and who's viewing the data set itself? And we're going to use those four metrics to say, okay, this is how I decide if this data set is valuable. But the challenge, of course, is how do I weigh or how do I evaluate whether or not having two output data sets is more or less important than having 22 data set views and no card views or no cards tied to it? How do I weigh that? And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a weighted scoring method where I can have multiple users, like Michaela. Michaela is more business focused, and so she'll weigh card interactions more highly than I would, and she's less focused on the data set views and data set outputs, right? So she'll have a different set of scoring. And Jamie happens to be a more technical oriented guy, so the metrics that he's more interested in are going to weigh the output data sets and data set views more highly than these other sets of metrics. Basically, what I'm going to sneak into this tutorial is how to do what if or scenario analysis, where different users might weigh things differently. What is the light at the end of the tunnel? Once you have this data set, you can basically make a report that says, hey, these data sets have no value. They have a weighted score of 0, which means of the metrics that I've defined, they're not useful, and I should probably delete them. This will be super important if you have a cap on the number of rows of data you can have in your instance. It's super important if you find out that, hey, I've got users who are building one-time use data sets for maybe one card, one dashboard, and they're not finding smart ways to consolidate those data sets. And a lot of that just comes down to training. That's the kind of thing that I talk about a lot on the channel, how you can make your work more recyclable. So yeah, I hope you stick around and enjoy. What topics how are we going to do this? Well, step one, and I think this is the hardest part. I was working with a international cosmetics company, and they were really struggling because they said, we want to do something like this governance thing, but specifically around data quality. We want to know if our data is high quality. And they couldn't figure out, or it took us a while to figure out how do you define your metrics for having good quality data? So they came up with a set of criteria, and then it was a matter of implementing that in a data flow. We're going to go over that. We're going to start with a baseline activity type. In a lot of the dashboard and card-oriented data sets that I build, I'll work with what's called an activity type, which lets you differentiate between this is information about cards, this is information about a data set. The baseline will be what's on our axis, basically every data set in my instance. More on that later. part of the challenge that you're going to have as you try to do this in your instance of Domo is understanding the granularity of the data. You want to be sure that you're really bulletproof, I guess, in your understanding, like this is what one row of the data represents. And this is how I get one row of data. So I'm going to use granularity a lot in this tutorial. So just be ready. I'm going to talk about some design patterns, including the use of append for recyclability instead of join. That's super critical, and I see so many users in the Domo Dojo get this wrong. Well, not wrong, but not right. I don't know. when you can use append, okay? And then the last thing I'm going to show you is that like scenario analysis trick that I put in place. And I'll say, I am a freelance consultant. I do work for companies. But if you are an individual getting value out of this presentation, there's a link on my YouTube channel where you can buy me a coffee. You can donate to the channel and just help me produce more content like this. All right, let's do it. This is the final ETL. Now it's really small, so it looks maybe a little bit scary, but it's not, right? There's no crisscrossing going on. It's relatively simple. I only have a handful of input data sets, but this is what we're going to build over the next, hopefully no more than an hour. Please don't make this last longer than an hour. All right, I'm going to duplicate this tab so I have my notes. And I can do this. We're going to just delete this and start over. Woo, scary. All right. Oh my goodness. So if you're not familiar with them already, Domo has produced a series of governance datasets and Domo Stats datasets, which I will be using in this tutorial. Let's take a quick look at those in case you're not familiar. So you can go into the Data tab, create a new dataset using our data connectors. This will obviously list out all of the connectors under the sun, but if I type for Domo, I'll see some of the connectors that are specific to Domo. And right now, we're going to look at Domo Governance. I will also refer to a Domo Stats dataset based off of the activity log later. But when I start talking about the activity log, this is where you go to set up Domo Stats. But I'm not going to show that for now. All right. Under Domo Governance, when you click on Get the Data, you're going to need to have a your instance of Domo, which will be spelled out, in my case, northshore-io-partner.domo.com, and you'll need an API key. The API key can be configured by going here under Admin and going to Security, going to Access Tokens, and generating an access token for yourself. Make sure to set a reasonable expiration date. Okay. Now, access tokens are created for an individual. And as you can see, the access token is usually used for a specific thing. So I'm going to create one for Domo Governance, for example. And you would click Generate. Now, you must copy paste this access token, write it down, because if you lose it, Domo will never show it to you again, and you'll have to generate a new one. But this is also functionally the same thing as my username and password. So I should never make a tutorial video where you can see my username and password in clear text. So don't share this with anyone, because it gives that person the same rights that you have in Domo. So I'm going to revoke that. Okay. So right, where were we? We were creating a Domo governance connector. Guys, these are the best thing. Please, please start using your governance connectors. Now, your connectors are just like every other connector in Domo. There's a series of reports that I can pull, and different reports will be about different things. I guess that's kind of obvious. It's a little bit of trial and error sometimes to find the right one that you need. But what I like to do is if I set up a new connector, then I will give the name of the connector, the name of the data set, the prefix gov to remind myself that it came from Domo Governance. And then I'll give it the same name as the report, which I just forgot. What did I pick? Dataset schema. No, I didn't want dataset. Sorry. I'm going to do schemas with tags. So in the name, I'll call it dataset schema with tags, so that I know exactly the report that I pulled. That's my pro tip. Then you click save, then you click create, and you've created your data set. Now, before you go about creating a data set, do check here in your data center. So you can filter on type, and you can governance is a data set type. So you can see if, maybe I've already created that report. Don't create multiple copies of the same report. It's just going to make you sad later. Okay, we're now ready to get started. So in my notes, I need to look off screen here. Right. In my notes, I said the first thing we want to do is define data quality metrics carefully. So I'll just start with one. I want to be able to calculate the number of, what are we going to do first? Cards. Yeah, we're going to build the number of cards against a data set. Number of cards against one data set. Okay, that's going to be the first metric that I want to build. And the granularity of that should be one row per card and the data set that it's attached to. Okay. Now, I need to start with a baseline activity type. And by baseline, I mean I need, in order, start over, Jay. If I were to list out, let me just grab the data set. There's a data set called governance cards and data sets. And you would think the granularity of this data set should be one row per card per data set. And that's useful, but what if I don't have a card built against every data set? Would that show up in this table? I don't know the answer, but intuitively I would say no, right? This table should only contain one row for each card and the data set that it's built against. So this would be the wrong table to start with. My baseline needs to be a list of every single data set. And so for that, I will use the Gov dataset report. Does that make sense when I'm talking about baseline? If not, leave a comment. We can talk about it later. What I'm going to do right off the bat is I'm going to be super parsimonious. I see a lot of people are like, I want all the information. All the information can be. My recommendation, just pull the stuff you know you need. So the only two columns I care about in my baseline are the dataset ID and the dataset name. Now, if you wanted to know, when was this dataset created? When was this dataset edited? When was the last time I ran this dataset, and use those metrics in your reporting, that's fine. But that's going to be outside of the scope of what I'm going to do. Right off the bat, I'm going to add a constant here for activity type. And that's what I'm going to use to differentiate everything. I'm going to set it to the text. I can call this baseline. I can call this data set. I think I'm going to call it baseline because that's the language I've been using with you guys. Cool. And then this, I know I'm going to be appending multiple data sets. I gave away a secret. I'm going to be appending multiple data sets together, but then that will feed my output. Okay, so that's one of the data sets that I want. The next data set, let's take a look. Oh, Domo. I already know what I have to do, and it makes me sad that I have to show you guys first because tutorials work. So I have this data set called cards and data set, and it should have one row per card. Interesting. The card ID column is null. That's great. And the dataset ID and name is null. Not spectacular. This dataset is not going to work for me because I need to know the dataset ID so that I can line it up with my dataset table. So even though this is the perfect report, given the name of the thing, I can't use it for what I need. There's a couple other data sets related to cards and data sets, but ultimately at the end of the day, we're going to end up using a data set called cards, fields, and beast modes. And this data set, about to get really upset. Why don't I see it? This data set has the data set oh my wow. Sorry guys, hold on. This is not. The columns of interest are card ID, card name, and the columns, the data source ID, and the data source name. Those are the columns of interest. You run a quick preview. I like the Domo governance data. They're very valuable, but they're not always good. In my opinion, Domo did not do enough QA, quality assurance, and testing on these data sets before releasing them into the wild. So sometimes they can behave a little bit squirrely. Okay, so here's this data set. The reason why you're seeing card ID and data source ID duplicated is because the granularity of this data set is one row per field or beast mode in the card. And so this card can have 5, 6, 7, 20 fields used in the card. And that's not what I want. I just want one row per card and data source. So I need to change the granularity. Are you understanding why this language of granularity is important? What does one row in the data represent? And what do you want it to be? So I'm going to use remove duplicates to, as it says on the tin, remove duplicates. Now in this case, I know card ID and data source ID are supposed to be unique. They are probably in case, they will always have the same case because they're objects in Domo, but as you use remove duplicates in your ETLs, think carefully about whether or not you want to do a case insensitive. Now I'm not doing remove duplicates based off of the card name or the data source name because I know that object 1, 2, 3, regardless of what name it has, object 1, 2, 3 is always the same. So I'm not going to test the other columns. All right. So at this point, I should have one row per card per data set. I'm going to add a new, I'm going to add my activity type in. I'm going to call this card because there's one card per data set. I'm going to append it in, I'm going to run my preview, and let's take a look. So here I only have one row per card. And that's my metric, or rather, my metric is now count the number of rows in this data set, and that's how many times this data source is being used. It's being used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times across 5 cards. That's my metric. Cool, one down, a bazillion to go. I'm going to jump straight into a more complicated one because this is about ETLs. And you know me, I love me a good ETL. All right. So let's see. ETLs are called data flows in Domo language. There is a governance data set called data flow details. And we're going to grab that one and we're going to preview it. Let's take a look at This is actually one of my favorite Domo Governance datasets. Of course, I'm biased. I do ETL. So here, I'm looking at a data fusion. Okay, why does it have 4 rows for the same data flow ID? It's got 4 rows because this fusion has 4 input data sets and no output data set ID. That's a little weird, right? You would think that the fusion itself would be the output, but let's take a look at some other ones. Those are fusions. Let me scroll down. I use a lot of fusions. Fusions are the best. Here's a data set, or a MySQL data flow. You won't see too many of these in my instance because magic is better. Here. So this is rows 44 through 47 are all about the same data flow. But what Domo's done that's a little bit interesting is I have 3 rows where the input data set is populated because these 3 inputs were used in that data flow. And then I have 1 row where the output data set is populated because that's the data set that was produced by this ETL. Similarly, I'm assuming this block here. So this ETL consumed these 2 inputs and produced these 2 outputs. Okay, now that's the shape of the raw data. Let's talk about what shape I want my data to be in for my fact. Okay. Now what I want to be able to calculate is I want to be able to say, hey, for this input data set, it was used to create those outputs. So if I have one data flow, let's say it has 2 inputs and it produces 3 outputs. For each input, I want those 3 outputs listed. And then for the second input, I want those 3 inputs out listed. Okay. So in other words, I would want these 4 rows, right, because I have 2 and 2, but I want to have output data set populated on every single row. That's the short version of what I'm trying to say. All right. So how are we going to do this? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're only going to select the columns of interest, right? So we're going to keep the data flow ID. I'm going to call this data flow name. Then I'm going to drop description. I'm going to need the data processing type in a minute. I'm going to drop all of this other stuff that I don't care about yet. I have the input dataset ID and the output dataset ID. Drop the rest. Like I said, if you're interested in knowing when was the last time it was run, how recently was it run, when was it created, right? All of those types of metrics, build that in later. Right now, all I care about, my metric of interest is how many times was this input data set used in an output, used in an ETL. Okay, cool. Now, I don't know if you caught it, but fusions are treated differently than ETLs. So I'm going to create a filter to allow me to process those 2 sets of data differently. I'm going to add a filter rule that says where the database processing type is equal to a specific value, data fusion, 1 word. Now, if you're using filters in Magic ETL, you want to always use exact opposites. So I'm going to duplicate this filter, and then I'm going to say database processing type. Database processing type. I'm going to do the opposite of equals, which is does not equal. Let's run our fusion and see if it's doing what we expected. This is for not fusion. Is fusion. Let's preview. So these should all be data fusions. They are. And I want to consistently see that the output data set is left blank. Cool. Now, what ETL am I going to do to get this into the right shape? The output dataset ID and name are the same as the data flow ID. This is the name of a data set. Sorry, this is a dataset ID here. So I'm just going to use a formula, right? My good old friend in Magic 2.0, the good old add formula. And I'm going to do an in-place replace of the output dataset ID and just set it to the data flow ID. And I'm going to replace the output dataset name with data flow name. Cool. That should handle my fusion. Now, for everything else, it's a little bit complicated, right? Because I want to get this value here onto that row and that row. So what I have to do is I have to split into two streams. I need to have one stream for my input, one stream for my output of a data flow, and then join them together. So I'm going to do another pair of filter rows. Here, I'm going to filter where input dataset ID is null. And I'm going to do the opposite and say is input is not null. Okay. Now, I think I can just straight join them together, can't I? And I can join on data flow ID is equal to, yeah, I can join on data flow ID is equal to data flow ID. Because in this stream, I've got all of the inputs for data flow A. In that stream, I've got all of the outputs for data flow A. I want to join them together where data flow equals A. Okay, my next favorite feature of Magic 2.0 is I can clean up my joins by auto-fixing. So I know that the column called data flow ID, I don't need it in both data sets. I know the data flow name is going to be the same. I know the data processing type and all of that's going to be the same. Cool. Oh, that's ugly. No, I don't like this as much. All right, we're going to do this a little bit cleaner. I'm going to put a select in between both. If I weren't making a tutorial, I probably would not do the select, but since I want to keep it nice and clean for everyone, I'll do a select. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the input column. Now I do ultimately want to keep data flow ID and data flow name and processing type. And the input ID, I'm just going to call this dataset ID because that's what I need to match up with with my baseline table. And this needs to be the dataset name. That needs to match up with my baseline table. Currently, because this is the input set, the outputs are null. So I'm going to drop those columns. Down here, I'm going to add all. The only column that I care about are my output IDs and the data flow that it belongs to. Now when I do my join, I don't have as many overlapping columns. So I'm going to autofix. Oh, J. I need to select my input. Okay. I'm going to put input on the left, output on the right, join on data flow ID, and then I'll autofix the right. The only overlapping column now is the data flow ID. That's a little cleaner. I like that. For those of you who are like, Jay, I can't see in your head what you're talking about. Let's run a quick preview, okay? So what were our steps? We separated our fusions from our non-fusions because the raw data treats them separately. Remember, the fusions never populate the output data set. And so what I want to do is I want to fill the output data set ID with the value from the data flow ID. So we can see that happening hopefully here. Nicely filled in. Cool. Now for my not fusions, we split it into input rows and output rows. So here, these rows should be output. Nice. J, you idiot. Sorry, I configured them backwards. Is not. Stick with me, guys. Stick with me for another, I think, tops 10 minutes, and then we'll get the first pass of our output data set into a card, okay? Promise, it's gonna be great. Okay, here's my inputs. The input data should be populated. I can drop the output column because I know it's never populated, and that's what's happening here in this select input. In my output data set, right, just the opposite, the inputs are never populated. So in my select output, I just keep data flow ID and the output data set ID. I join them together. And now for data flow 18, I should have, this was the input data set, and it produced this output and that output. And this input produced this output and that output. Okay, so you get the idea. I have, sorry, what am I looking at? Sorry, I said it wrong. These two inputs were consumed to produce this one output. And here, these three inputs were used to create one output. All right. Let me add my constant. So this is going to be activity type is ETL. My append, not join. Add it to my append. Okay. And only include shared no, include all columns. Remember, I'm trying to make sure I have consistent names. So I want to make sure I'm not like deleting something that should exist elsewhere. So what is this? I don't need the card ID, card name, data flow, data source. Okay, data source ID and data source name should be called data set. Data set name. So here, where it's called data source, I'm going to call this data set because that's what it's called everywhere else. Okay, so now the number of rows that are being added has gone down. Just card ID, data flow stuff, and that's my baseline. I should make some good constants. So I'll call this const baseline, const card, const ETL. All right, let's save and run. Oh, right. I forgot to join my data sets back together. Sorry, not join, append. So for stuff related to ETLs, I need to pull my non-fusions and my fusions together. How am I doing for time? 35 minutes. Oh God, we have so much to cover, guys. I'll try to pick up the speed, but I obviously don't want to lose anyone. I never know if I'm doing my tutorials too fast or too slow. So if you feel like I'm going too slowly, feel free to leave some comments and say, Jay, you can talk faster. And then in this one, I need to rename this. We'll call this dataset name. These should both have the same schema, so I don't want to see any changes. I added my constant, joined it all in, clean up the alignment because I'm a little OCD, which you have to be good at developing, right? So I tell myself. Let's create ourselves a card here. Table card. Looking for so on the axis, I'm going to put dataset ID and dataset name. Guys, earlier I talked about having a baseline activity type. This is where it's super important. It's possible that I have no activity. I have no cards built against the data set. I have no ETLs built against the data set, but I still want it in my report. And that's why I had to use the Domo Governance Dataset as my baseline. Okay? And now I want to count cards. Now, I know because of the way that my data is shaped, I can say the only columns, the only time card ID is populated is if the activity type is card, where I have a card on the data set. I could do this, but I'm not going to. This is completely valid. And when I drop it on the axis, I can now see, let me do a mega table so I can apply sorting. Okay, I can now see this sample data set has 58 cards against it, and I have a whole bunch of cards with 0. This illustrates the need for the baseline, right? I wouldn't see these data sets if I hadn't joined the two data sets together, cards and the baseline. Okay. Cool. What's my other metric? Oh, I said I wasn't going to use it. I'm not going to use it. I don't like using count, if possible, in my analyzer. Instead, I'm going to use a case when activity type equals card, then one else. I'm not going to do an else. Then one. Okay. Why do I prefer sum of 1 instead of count card ID? Well, because tomorrow I might add a data set to my log, sorry, to this stack that has values in the card ID column, but it's not about the activity type equals card. I might add dashboards, right? So by using, by filtering on the activity type, I guarantee that I'm looking at the right subset of data. Also, this is going to come back to later. So, okay. I'm also going to do number of ETLs. Case when activity type equals ETL, then 1 else 0. I like how clean it is. Same code. It's the same beast mode, just slightly different shape. Cool. Awesome. Now I have that. Now I can see, hey, this card, this data set has a bunch of cards built against it, no ETLs built against it, but it's clearly useful, right? And then down here, Jay Wilson, he loves, no, that's Domo. This guy, GL entry, Jay Wilson loves building ETLs against this table. Not a lot of cards built against it, but still useful. And remember I said we're going to do that weighted scoring thing. And I'll get to that towards the end of the video. I'm going to take a short pause for the cause. Guys, I love making YouTube videos like this. Like I'll spend 2 or 3 hours just building the idea. I'll spend 2 or 3 hours recording it, so it's nice and professional. And if you're getting good value out of this, guys, if this is beneficial for you in your career, please, please, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers so that I can become a YouTube partner and start selling stuff through YouTube. Also, on the YouTube channel itself, there is a button where you can buy me a coffee if you want to pitch some money my way to help fund this channel. Cool. Also, if you like what you're seeing and you want to bring me into your business as a consultant, I do obviously have a proper company set up on its reporting, and we do consulting and services and all that stuff. So, done with the sales pitch. Hate that. But you got to do it. Got to pay rent and eat food. All right, back to my ETL. So we're in a good space. What did we build? We built data flows against number of cards, and we built metrics to count the number of data flows it was used in. But it doesn't really capture user activity. So earlier I said we were going to take a look at clicking all over the place. Stop clicking. I'm going to save this. Yeah, I said we were going to take a look at the activity logs. Again, to create an activity logs data set, if you don't have it in your instance, talk to your CSM about getting the activity logs from the App Store. They're kind of good. They're kind of good. What I'm doing is obviously a little bit better because it consolidates it in a way that the App Store doesn't. But talk to your CSM. Tell them Jay Wilson from Honest Reporting. Is it called Stats? Domo Stats. All right. So the activity logs are from a set of reports called Domo Stats. And just like with Domo Governance, we had a whole bunch of different things. Domo Stats has a whole bunch of different things. And it's a little bit of trial and error finding the set of the report that has the information that you need. If you are confused and lost and need help, join the Domo Slack channel. God, I'm doing so much. Oh, I don't like it. I don't like doing advertising. Sorry. But there is a Domo user group that has people like me who just love Domo and love talking about Domo. Obviously, you can get information out of the Domo dojo, but the Slack group is another place that you can come to get, insider scoop on what's happening. Anyway, back to the thing, activity log. Let's take a preview of this data. Sorry, guys. Well, not really, sorry. Free training. Okay, so the activity log captures activity in the Domo instance. And what we're interested in is user activity. So I'm going to add a filter for the activity type, the type is user. And then I'm going to see the object type. What did this user interact with? They can interact with cards, and they can interact with data source. Really? We have 2 spellings for data source, Domo? Really? What? That's interesting. So this is for creating a data set, and this is for also creating a data set. Really? Oh, that's check your activity log. Remember I said you have to define your quality metrics carefully. Apparently Domo is spelling data source and data source the same way. This is still going to work for us. I'm going to also filter where the action is. I'm only interested in when people view. Yeah. View a card or view a data source. So those are the filters I'm constructing in my head the filters that I need in order to get access to the right data for my reporting. What's the granularity of the data I'm looking at? It's one row per, in this case, user interaction with that object. What's interesting thing about this is that it does have the event that it happened. So I can say, hey, I can have one metric for like, maybe I'll value activity that occurred in the last 30 days more highly than I'll value activity that occurred in the 30 to 60 days ago, right? I can use the event time for that. But that's outside of the scope of what we're doing right now. Can't do everything in a free tutorial. All right, here's where we were. So we're now going to pull in the activity log. Activity log is needed input data set. Activity log. Here we go. Okay. Now remember, we always want to start by just getting the data of interest, right? I don't want to overwhelm myself as I'm putting this together. So I've got a list over here that I'm peeking at. Okay. So the objects of interest, the fields of interest are the type, the object that was interacted with, what action did the user take, what was the ID of the object that was interacted with, what was the ID of the user who did the interacting, and when did it happen. I'm only going to use columns 1 to 3 for filtering, and then actually columns 4 through 6 are the actual metric itself. So let's talk about the different filters. How am I going to subset this data? Remember, I said I'm only interested in activity that was driven by a user. So that's where the type equals user. This is, Domo is case sensitive, so check your activity log. Is it spelled user full caps? Is it data underscore source, or data source is one word? Is it both? Okay. I'm also, in this instance, I'm only going to consider where the action is of action equals viewed. But you might also be interested if something was created or if something is updated. So instead of creating my filter using this method, I'm going to add a formula rule where I can say action is in, and now I can make a list. So if you wanted to, then you could also add created, but I'm not going to choose to include that. I really like these formula rules. Good job. Good stuff. All right. So I'll call this is user action. Cool. Now, I'm also going to split my data into two streams, because if the data is I viewed a card, I need to get some different metadata than if the activity was I viewed the data source, right? Because card information and data source information are coming from two different tables. So I'm going to create another filter here. And I'm going to select where the object type is a card. And I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to filter where the object type, I'm going to use the formula. I'll add a formula and say, I really hope I'm still recording. And I'm up to 50 minutes. There's no way I'm keeping this under an hour. Sorry, guys. Object type is in, data source, and apparently sometimes it's spelled data source. Interesting. I have words. They're not nice. Okay, cool. Now let's organize this. This is for cards, right? I'm going to move that here, take this, slide it down. I don't like to have overlapping and crisscrossing. um, data flows, but it's kind of necessary. Take a look here. So I'm looking at my card action. What kind of data do I have as I look at the card? So I can see who was the user, what object did they view, so which card did they look at. Now, I don't care about what card they looked at. What I care about is what data set that card is built off of. And in order to answer that question, I need to grab data here from my card baseline or my card dimension, if you will. So I need to do a join. And I need to grab data from my list of, remember up here, this is cards and data sets. I'm going to join that to my card action. And I'm going to filter on the card ID is the object that the user interacted with. Good stuff. Now I'm going to do some cleanup. I'm going to remove the unnecessary columns. The only thing I care about is the fact that I know this is always viewed. So I have the object ID is the same as the card ID. I can drop that as well. So the only columns I really care about are what user it was and what time they did the viewing. So I dropped so many columns. Love it. All right, I'm going to add my activity type. I will call this card view. Now, again, if you were doing created a card and updated a card or deleted a card, right? Those types of activities, you might create a different activity type. Or in your beast mode, you might filter where activity type is equal to card action, and then also include the action type. So viewed or created. So a couple ways to do that if you want to do something a little bit more sophisticated. All right. In this set here, we're on the home stretch, guys. Here, I'm looking at user interactions with the data source. And in this case, the object ID is the name of the data set. Or sorry, the data set ID, but I want to know information about the data set that was being looked at. So I'm going to do a join, again, just like I did for actions. Not there. To get the data from my baseline. Okay, so same story, right? I'm going to join on the dataset ID is equal to the object ID, and same thing again, I'm going to remove the columns that I don't care about. So I don't care about the type, and I don't care about the object type because I know it's a data set. I don't care about the object ID because I have that data from the other data set, and I don't care about the action because I know it's always viewed. I'm going to add my constants. And this time the activity type is dataset view. Am I doing singular or plural? View or views? Singular, view. Okay, I append it all together. All right. Take a look at what I'm doing in terms of adding and removing columns. So now database processing type comes from the ETLs, that event, time, output, user ID. Okay, I think what I'm going to do, instead of calling event time, because that's, I'll call this action time. And instead of having this a user ID, I might call this action user ID. And that's going to make sense in a minute. For data flow details, I'm going to call this, I'm going to have to fix so many things, but this is important, ETL output ID and ETL output name and ETL, just call this ETL type. ETL data flow ID and ETL data flow name. So I'm prefixing everything with ETL except for the columns dataset ID and dataset name. Now it's unfortunate that it's breaking things, but if I had planned this a little bit better, I wouldn't have to do it now. Processing type is the ETL type. We'll see in a second. It's called ETL data flow ID and ETL data flow name. Columns. Okay, am I done clicking? Drop it. Okay, why did I do that rename? Because here, when I look at the field names, action time and action user ID, I know that's coming from the log, and I could have called it log time and log ID, I guess. ETL, look at all of that, it nicely lines up. Everything related to ETL is now prefixed ETL. Everything, ooh, why do I have an output dataset ID? Oh, because, wait, why do I have an output? Right, because it, yeah. Okay. See? How easy was that to clean up? So now I can just see what I'm adding or removing, and they're kind of grouped together by the ETL that they come from, or sorry, the stream of data that they come from. I really like that. Guys, this is the end of the ETL, well, the major ETL section. I'm going to go back to my, what do we say? Okay, we wanted to start by defining our data quality metrics carefully. Know what you want to measure. Get clear about what you want to measure. And for those of you who are just developers, this might be a conversation that you have to have with your business stakeholders, because they're the only ones, or you as a major domo are the only one who can decide, okay, this is useful if this criteria is met. And have that conversation. If you start deleting stuff and you didn't measure all of the things that were important, people get upset. We started by creating a baseline activity type, right? We said I need a list of all of the data sets, because if I pull up my list from just data set that has activity, this data set does not measure the stuff that does not have activity. Okay. When we were working with cards, fields, and beast modes, right? We're taking data and using it for something else. This data set has one row per card per field or beast mode. And so we had to change the granularity of this data set so that it would suit our purposes. And we used remove duplicates for that reason. Make sure that you talk to your IT person, your IS person, using the language of granularity, which is how do you get one row in the data set, or cardinality for how many distinct values are there. We saw when we were profiling, when we were looking at the activity log, I kind of lost my mind for a hot second that object type can be data source and data underscore source. So do be careful when you profile your data. Make sure that it contains what you think it contains, and build some reporting around the assumptions that you're making, so that you know you're not making an ass out of you. And I don't know. Okay. And then we talked about append. Okay. Most people, and by most people I mean literally every customer I've worked with, would have done, they would have created this data set, and they would have done a join, or sorry, they would have done a group by data set, count the number of cards, and then join it to the baseline. That's how most people would approach this. And while that does get the job done, you're now locked in because you don't have the flexibility. Like, let's say a follow-up question is, okay, well, I only want to target cards on a specific dashboard. You're locked in because you did a group by clause, and now I have to do a big edit of my ETL. Don't join. Try to append when possible. Okay. Now we did have to do a join here. And we had to do a join here because as I was looking at my card action, I had information about the object, information about the card, but I don't know what table, what data set this card is built against. So I did have to use a join to my card and data set baseline. So there are times when a join is appropriate, but if you can, always try to take an append so that you can recycle your code and use it multiple times. I'm going to show you how to build scenario analysis in just a second, and then you'll buy me a coffee, I hope, using the link on the Onyx Reporting channel page in YouTube. Or leave a comment, or like, or subscribe. Do all the things. Here we go. Let's wrap this up. So I have the number of cards, I have the number of ETL, and they have been renamed, and I should now have some new columns. All right, so now I'm going to count the number of card views. So case when activity type equals card view, then 1, else 0. No else. I'm intentionally avoiding else, and I'll talk about that. Card views. Sorry, what? It's not in all caps. Yeah, okay, I have data. And then the last one was the number of data set. Home stretch, guys. I'm typing as fast as I can, I promise. Okay, look at that. Okay, good. We are in a great place. Do I have an else 0 on this num ETL? I said we're not doing else zeros. We're not doing else zeros. Why aren't we doing else zeros? Because I don't want to look at a bunch of zeros. Cool, this works, right? And then if you wanted to know the total, right? Well, total isn't useful because the number of cards built on a data set probably is not as valuable as the number of views of those cards, or the number of ETLs that a data set is used in is not comparable to the number of cards, right? So we talked about scenario planning, or flexibility. We talked about flexibility. We're going to use a web form, my activity weighting web form. And I've already filled it out for us, but I just need to make sure I did the right spelling. Data set card. Yeah. Okay. So this is super cool because you can hand this to your business stakeholders and you can say, hey, Jamie, you're the head of the BI department. Can you weight how important these governance metrics are for you? And you can walk over to Michaela's desk. Hey, Michaela, you run the marketing team and we're trying to clean up your data. Can you weight how important these things are for you. And what we'll do is we'll make sure the ones that are, that get the highest score, they'll continue working. The ones that have the lowest score, we'll look at consolidating. Or maybe you have something that has a lot of card views, but it runs really poorly, or you're having troubles with it. Like, it'll help us target the things that are important. That's the narrative you spin for those. And then I have a baseline. And the baseline is just the value of everything is 1. Okay. That's my activity weighting. User, the activity has to match, let's call this activity type, so we know what we're matching to, and the value, we'll call this the weight. Cool. I am now going to construct a fusion that combines my weightings with the raw data. I'm a huge fan of fusion. And you might say, but Jay, why didn't you just write this? Why didn't you just join this data into your magic? I didn't join it into my magic because your activity log will eventually become a multi-million row data. And the list of data sets and cards and all of that stuff will be multi-thousand row data sets. There's no reason to reprocess the entire data flow if Mark or Michaela come over and say, hey, Jay, I kind of want to change my weighting. I don't want to rerun the data flow and say, oh, yeah, okay, fine, but you have to wait 20 minutes for this thing to run. No. We're going to build for flexibility. So I'm going to create a fusion where I pull in my activity weighting. I'm going to pull in my governance dataset efficiency. I called it dataset. We're going to join on the activity type. I'm going to do an inner join, but you want to be careful, right? Because if you have a typo, if somebody misspells the activity type, like I did earlier, then it won't show up in your data set. So do be careful when you're doing inner join. I don't need 2 copies of the activity type column, so I'm going to drop one of them. I know they are the same. Let's build our final card. In fact, I'm going to just transfer this card we've been looking at over that new data set I just created. Everything works the same. So how do I get my weightings? All right. To get your weightings, what you're going to do is you're actually going to take all of the beast modes I previously created. Okay, I'm going to take all of the beast modes I previously created and put them in. I'm going to call this weighted score. And then I'm going to multiply the count times the weight. How cool is this? I hope somebody's like cheering on their desk applauding, because I was super excited as I developed this. Okay, that's a pretty cool idea. All right, I'm going to save and close. And I'm going to drop the weight. It's intentionally wrong, by the way. All right. So I've got numbers here. I should have a number here in weighted score. And you're like, Jay, why don't you have a number here? The reason why there isn't a number here is because you cannot add nulls. What is the value contained in this column? Null. What about here? Null. What about there? Null. Okay, so what am I asking Domo to do? I'm saying, hey, take 232 plus null, plus null, plus null. And you're like, Jay, I expect there to be 232, but you can't add nulls together. And so the sum of something plus null is null. And so there's 2 ways to approach this. I could wrap all of these in an if null. I can do that, but I won't. I will do an else 0. And now that I have an else 0, I have 232, or I have 1 times 2, 3, 4, plus 1 times 2, 3, 4, da da da. Here I have 0 plus 0, 0, and so I get a value. And so this is correct math. You might say, Jay, 406 is a lot higher than 232. Well, remember, I have several base users. I have several users metrics in here, right? If I look at baseline, the value was 1. And so it should be a clean sum across. 58 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 58. 30 plus 3 is 33. 29 plus 1 plus 4, I hope it's 34. Okay, so that's the baseline that I had at the bottom of my weighting form. Here, where the value is equal to 1. Now we're going to take a look at Mark's rating. Remember, Mark values, it looks like dataset views and ETLs more than he values cards and card views. So as I look at Mark's weighted score is 116. Da, 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 da. Yeah. Well, that's his weighted score. And if I want to do a blend of what does Mark and Michaela value, right, I get a different score. Should I do a percent of total just for grins? I should. Can I? Oh, that's a lot. Sorry, guys. It can be done, but we're not going to do a percent. Leave a message in the comments. Okay. We've reached the end of our journey. If you got this far, congratulations. You now know how to build the most bomb dataset efficiency, Domo Governance, Domo Stats dataset that allows you to weight how important an object is. And it doesn't have to be just a dataset. You could do this for cards. You could do this for dashboards. You could extend this to say, hey, you know what? The cards that are on the executive dashboard, way more important than cards that are not. You could add some more logic to say, hey, if the data set is a duplicate of something else or has the name of copy of in the title, right? You can make all sorts of ways of prioritizing different things, and this will help you make your Domo governance job a lot easier. The best part about this is I just have to add the owner ID column to my data set, and now down here I can say, where are my zeros? Oh, because I did an inner join. Literally said be careful about the thing, and then I did an inner join. Anyway, for the data sets that have no score, right, you could just send an automated alert to the user and say, hey, this has been flagged as a low value data set. It will be automatically deleted in 15 days. If you want a tutorial about how to automatically delete data sets, let me know, but also be careful because automation is automation. We can have that conversation. Cool. That was the thing. Guys, my name is Jay Wilson. I am a freelance consultant at my company, Onyx Reporting. This is what I do. I build ETLs for nerds. I build data sets for Domo, major domos. I partner with strategic stakeholders to say, hey, this is the value we want to get out of our data. How can we get there? If you have any questions about what you can do with Domo, feel free to hit me up at jae@onyxreporting.com. Alternatively, leave a message. We'll let you know how to get into the Domo user group, or find me in the Domo Dojo. That's where I hang out. Thanks so much, guys. We'll catch you later, okay?